days, and then we'll open it up for some discussion. We're planning to run about an hour.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, and like Gina said, I haven't been working on ggplot for, quite some time now. And I was trying to refresh my memory. I was like, okay, okay, I remember making ggproto. I'm trying to remember, okay, why did we do this? Why did we not use R6? I'll try to cover these things. I didn't have like a specific plan for exactly how I'm going to go about this, but I will try to walk everyone through like what we were thinking at the time. And also, I have my copy of Jen, I don't know which version of the R Graphics Cookbook you have. This is the second edition, which is also this is when did this come out? 2018 or something? This has been out for a while, so this is not new stuff anymore. 2019. But I liked the first edition, which had the black and white. This is actually colorized, the animal on there, and I was kind of sad that they did that. I like the classic black and white etchings of
After
it.
2012.
2012. Okay, yeah,
So,
so you have the nicer one. You have the nicer
okay.
one. But not quite as up to date. Although the new one, I mean, it's not so new anymore, so it could stand to be updated as well. Okay, so yeah, so I have been working for Posit since 2012, and of course it was our studio back then. Um, and and before that, for about I don't know, before I started working for our studio, I was working for Hadley. This is when he was a professor still at Rice University. Um, and that was for about 6 months. So I finished my PhD. I went to work for Hadley. At the time, it worked out very well for that because I was not. I didn't want to continue on the academic path. I hadn't like looked at all for jobs or postdocs or anything like that. And then all this stuff came along, like working on the book, and then working for Hadley. So that all came together like right at the very end of grad school, which was very fortunate for me. And then I got to do some of this stuff here, like working on ggplot2 and this ggproto stuff. Um, so so earlier today I was like refreshing my memory about ggproto and how does it work? Why is it like this? Um, so in ancient history, before ggplot2 used ggproto, it was using a package called proto for its object system. And it's proto, my understanding of it is that um, it was based on the same type of inheritance that JavaScript has. So this is JavaScript before JavaScript introduced classes, which is um, sort of like the JavaScript classes these days. If you say like a class foo, um, those are sort of a more sort of standard kind of object-oriented system. So that's what you'd see in like C++ or Java or Python, where you'd say class foo, and then you define some stuff. And that defines the class, and then to instantiate the class, you'd say new foo. Um, so that's the modern way of doing it. The older way of doing it was with this prototypal inheritance. So you'd have like some object A, and then there's a way that you could say that object B uses A as a prototype. Okay, but you don't instantiate classes or anything like that. It's just like this literal object B takes A as its prototype. So if you change a property on A, so like A dot X, if you change that to something else, then that will also show up changed on B. Um, and that was how proto worked, the proto package. And well, so I believe the main motivator for switching over to a new version of it, which we call ggproto, was because of people writing extensions, right? So like, like a lot of people here. Um, Doing inheritance across packages with proto was fraught with problems. Now, this is the part where it's a little bit fuzzy. I would actually have to look at the code for proto in order to be certain about this. But what my recollection is that if you did some inheritance from a proto object to another one, it would evaluate and do that inheritance at build time. So let me actually, I pulled up some code for ggproto that actually explicitly avoids this. So I'll show this. Let me share my screen here. Oops, screen sharing is not turned on. So okay. All right. So this is. So I was just looking at this is on GitHub. I'm just looking at it in their nice VS Code interface. You can go to github.dev. So with ggproto, let me make this bigger just to make sure so that people can see here. Close the search bar. This is ggproto.r, and this is the ggproto function. There's this part right here where we say, well, you pass in the name of the class, what you want to call it, and then inherit. And this is, you pass it the object that you want it to inherit from. So if you've done non-standard evaluation in R before, this looks familiar. This might look familiar. So say substitute inherit. And so that would captures that whatever symbol it is that the person passes in so it can be evaluated later. And my memory is that proto did not do this. And so what would happen is if you've got some package that is inheriting from like ggplot, back then it was probably like version 0.9 or something. And you've got your like, geom X, and it's inheriting from the geom class in ggplot. So like this is the geom. Back then it would have been the proto class or proto object. The terminology is a little bit fuzzy for me there. It would evaluate this. It would run this code when you built your package, right? So your extension package. And then if somebody upgraded their version of ggplot, then your prototype for your geom-x would be it would have captured this old version of the geom class from the old version of ggplot. And actually that would sort of pull in a lot of stuff, like a lot of stuff that is captured in like in these functions, these closures here, that would your package would actually like have ingested and like recorded a whole bunch of the old ggplot package. And so when they build these packages on the binary packages on the CRAN build servers, like it'll just capture those whatever version of ggplot2 was there at the time. And then but things, if the ggplot2 changed later, then you'd have this mismatch and things could go wrong. So ggproto, oops. Yeah, so this was the important part. This is capturing the symbol, like the geom symbol. So let me show you here. So this is the base geom class. So if we look at geom point, okay, ggproto, the string name geom point, and it inherits from this geom class. But it captures a symbol unevaluated, and then later on, it will evaluate that. So that is a key thing for inheritance across packages. And I was also looking at this vignette, this extending ggplot2, and thought it was funny. What did he say? Yeah, fortunately, Winston is now very good at creating object-oriented systems. Da, 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 da. So at this time in the past, I had created R6, which is a object-oriented system that's more similar to like classical object-oriented systems, like like in C++ and Python and so on. And I ran into this very same problem. So I already knew, from sort of struggling through that, like, oh, we just have to do this. We just have to do this thing where we capture that expression unevaluated and evaluate it later. And it's funny talking about it now. It's like, oh, this seems so straightforward. It's so obvious. Back then, um, like I was just starting to have a decent understanding of how environments worked in R. And I think back then, you know, Hadley was still learning about like how environments worked in R. And I think since then, um, like the broader R community has learned a lot about it. And like the R-Lang package is all about, all the sorts of weird non-standard evaluation and environments and things like that. But back then that was it was not like common knowledge like it is today, or at least what it feels like it is to me today. I mean, I guess I'm not sure if everybody is like super familiar with this stuff, but there's a lot more written about it now than there was then. Okay, right. So the proto now, all right. So this is actually, there's not a lot of code here, right? ggproto, and it does some things here, and it captures this, that inheritance thing, and then yeah, this is it. That's that's the function, or that's the code for creating a ggproto object. I don't know what all the rest of this stuff is. These are all like, well, a lot of these are like convenience methods and wrappers and things like that. So, it's, I also feel like maybe saying it's a new class system is, or it's saying, yeah, saying it's a new class system might be a little bit of a stretch, I guess. It's because there isn't anything like super sophisticated or complicated here going on. It's another way to think about it is it's like syntactic sugar for creating objects that look a certain way. Okay. Right. So that was one of the problems with. So that was the main issue with Proto. Now you might be wondering, well, let's take a look at. I had it pulled up here. So the Proto. Well, let's see, plan Proto. So if you take a look at this here, you'll see. Oh, look, Hadley's the maintainer of Proto. Why is that? Why didn't he just change Proto? Um, so a couple of reasons. So originally somebody else wrote the proto package, and then Hadley became the maintainer because ggplot2 was reliant on it, and it was the most prominent package that depended on it. Now it's these are the packages that depend on it now, so it's a lot less. And there's a few reasons for it. I think the way the code was written, like I didn't fully understand the code in Proto, and Hadley did not fully understand the code in Proto. And so we were afraid of making changes that would break some other packages. And also like we didn't fully understand it. And so even if we did understand it and we made changes to that inheritance, like would that break things for somebody else? Like we didn't know for sure. So, and there wasn't so much code there to implement this ggproto stuff just in ggplot2 itself. So we ended up going this way. Now, another thing another idea that we played with was using R6. So instead of using Proto, using R6. So like, let's use this sort of classical object-oriented system that is, looks a lot more like, you know, other languages out there, and let's use that instead. And and so this was a part like no, we definitely played around with this, and I was actually trying to refresh my memory, like why did we not do this? And I I'm pretty sure the reason is that there's a lot of assumptions baked into how ggplot worked, and people writing code for ggplot2 that assumed that that they would have this prototypal inheritance and not sort of the classical, where you have a class and then you instantiate the class. Um, so that is my memory of it. If I've spent some more time digging around, I might be able to answer that question a little bit better. So if anybody here is curious about it, still I can still dig around a little bit. Obviously I'm partial to R6, and R6 is nice. It has some good performance characteristics. But I think in this particular case, that didn't really matter that much for ggplot. So yeah, so that is my memory of ggproto, why it's there, a little bit about how it works. I don't does anybody have any like questions about like technical details or ancient ggplot2 history that I could answer? Because I'd be happy to. Yeah, Corey.
Or, yeah.
Where did I hear this? I think Tune mentioned a few meetings ago that there was interest in finally turning themes into a ggproto kind of approach, whereas as every other core element of ggplot of the grammar of graphics has been. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. Was the plan always to make every sort of step in Wilkinson's sort of taxonomy into one of these protos, or was it originally conceived just that like the layers and maybe the coordinate systems or some subset of those things would be?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know, I had not started working on ggplot at the very beginning. So, you know, Hadley made some design decisions about the structure of, you know, the class structure and things like that. As for why themes, yeah, so themes are kind of outside of the Wilkinson conception, or the Wilkinson, you know, grammar of graphics. I actually don't know if there was if Hadley had a specific reason for not using this prototype of prototypal inheritance for themes. I do remember, you know, working on the themes and getting that all straightened out was kind of a pain at the time. I think it's easier now, it's better now, but it was quite a pain at the time. So sorry, that's what I that's all I can that's what I can remember about it, and that's the best I can answer that question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. June?
Yeah, thanks. This is interesting. And I actually kind of have a similar question about like what components get treated as like a ggproto or not. And one thing that I'm thinking of is, you know, it's pretty clear that like an OOP system is good for like extensibility and whatnot. But I think, you know, some ggprotos behave a little differently than others. So I think like scales are like sometimes stateful. Whereas if you consider things like stats and geoms, those are just like you know, kind of placeholders for various functions. So I'm wondering, like, you know, if you were to kind of go back, like, is ggproto the best kind of like one size fits all solution, or would it maybe help to have different, you know, granular, you know, types of objects that are maybe some of them are for the, you know, geoms and stats, some of them for layers, some of them are for scales and so on.
Yeah, it's okay, interesting. So, you know, I think so when we were working on this ggproto stuff, you know, like Hadley and I talked about it, and you know, we were we definitely had conversations where we thought like, oh man, it'd be nice if we could do this, you know, like R6 style, like modern, or well, not modern, classical object-oriented style, instead of being stuck with proto. I mean, there's a lot of things that would be different, like you know, like ggplot would use the pipe operator instead of plus, the plus operator to you know, to compose things. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely make no claim as to like that ggproto would be is like the best way to do it, to do these things. It's sort of, you know, in my opinion, it's sort of like a it's like a historical like path dependence artifact, you know, like this is how it started, and it ended up being really hard to change. So that's why it's still like that. Similar to like why ggplot uses plus instead of, you know, piping, even though the rest of the tidyverse uses piping now. I am curious about the scales that you're talking about and like what stateful parts of it there are. I mean, Do you have any
I
particular
think
ones?
just
in mind?
the like training of the scales that you apply. So like within a plot, it would get its own scale, which has data about the trained scales that it would use for
Oh, okay.
the layer level operations.
Yeah, right. So let's see, scale, what's a good one? Size. Okay, so these are sort of the user level functions. And then where's the ggproto or the discrete? Oh, okay, wait, sorry, I'm like okay, so this is the sort of thing like scale discrete, train, and then there's some stateful stuff, self range, yeah, and then this would have to be. Sorry, you guys might be able to interpret this faster than I can right now. I'm like, I'm trying to remind myself how this works. Yeah, so there is some stateful stuff in there. Yeah. Yeah, where does that go? Where does that stuff go? The stateful stuff.
I think it's a little side effecty if I remember it correctly from when
Yeah,
you call those train functions.
yeah, and this discrete.
Oh, it's from
Sorry, if ever, if this is a little bit too in the weeds for this kind of this meeting, but please let me know. Oh, it's that. Okay.
Sven has a comment
Yeah.
in the
Oh, okay. Oh,
discussion, if you just want to jump in.
yeah,
Oh,
please do.
yeah, so the range, which is the stateful part of a scale, that is actually implemented in R6 and comes from the scales package.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
But I don't know why the scales class keeps a stateful part, and in other instances like geoms, stats, people actively avoid introducing stateful things. I don't know why this is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know either. I mean, yeah, I think uh if it were using a yeah, classical object-oriented system, um there wouldn't be as much worry about this distinction. Like you just instantiate, these the classes for every time you're using them. But yeah, that is a weird thing that there's some stateful stuff here. I mean, I guess the scales need to have some state unless you store it. That's that information. Yeah, I don't know what other object you would store it on. But yeah, that stateful information would have to be somewhere, I guess. Yeah. All right. Any other comments or questions about, ggplot or this, at least, or this time period for ggplot? All right. Well, I can talk a little bit about R Graphics Cookbook and how that came to be then, if everyone's interested.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that was let's see, all of this happened towards the end of 2012. So that's a long time ago now. That's a little bit over 12 years ago. So I was in my last year of grad school, and so at the time, when I was in graduate school, this is for psychology, people were doing their statistics. Most of the people in my department were using SPSS. And I found that very confusing because, you do some analysis, something simple, right? So like it's like a t-test or an ANOVA, and you'd bring in your data and you'd click some buttons and you'd check some boxes for turning on various options, and then you'd run your analysis. And but then if you got in more data, like if you're looking at this as you're running an experiment, which I guess these days is probably frowned upon, but lest you be a p hacker. So, but if you're looking at your data and you want to analyze it and you get more data and you want to reanalyze it, you either have to like remember like what things you selected, or you'd have to use like the SPSS quote syntax, where it provides some code to do your analysis. And I found that very confusing. I had a somewhat of a computer programming background, so I mentioned that to my advisor, and he gave me the next day he came down with like this burned copy of like a SAS DVD, and I was like, okay, here you can install this, and it'd be like several gigabytes on my computer, and I was like, okay, I don't know, I heard people don't like SAS either, and then I knew that there were some people in the department that were using R. And it was in a different part of the department, but I heard that they were using it, so I was like, okay, maybe I'll try R and try to learn it, and teach myself. So that was a struggle back then. There weren't a lot of good learning resources. This is back in, oh, thanks for turning off the screen sharing. That was back in like 2008, 2009. So so I'd figure something out and I'd write it down, and I put it in this, I made a little website. I would just put it there. It was, back then it was called R Cookbook, not R Graphics Cookbook, but just R Cookbook. And later on I changed it to the website name to Cookbook for R, so that there wouldn't be any confusion with the O'Reilly book. That was also called R Cookbook. So I just add stuff there, and I'd figure something out. It's like, I mean, really basic stuff that it took a little bit of struggle for me to figure out. And I just kept growing that website and adding more stuff about doing plots, because I thought that was interesting. And so that was me not focusing on my graduate studies. So I'm guessing actually a fair number of people here might be like that, which is why you're here. So I was working on this thing, and eventually, this is in my last year of grad school. Somebody from, like, I had no expectations from this, right? So, but somebody from O'Reilly contacted me and asked me if I wanted to write a book about data visualization in R. And I was like, yes, that sounds amazing. It was like really great timing. It was, I was just I was in my last year of graduate school, and I didn't know what I was going to do next. So I spent a lot of time working on that. And I was using ggplot, so I would, I want to write something for the book, and I was like, okay, like I want to do like notched box plots, right? And base R had that at the time, ggplot didn't, so I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll try to, I'll file an issue on it, and I'd filed issues for other, like, for bugs and stuff that I found, and sometimes Hadley would fix them. And then eventually I tried coding against it. So I tried, okay, I think notch box plots is one of the first things that I implemented. I can't remember for sure. And made a pull request, figured out GitHub and all that sort of thing. And I kept doing that stuff mostly in service of mostly in service of being able to do the book. But also because I found it was fun and it was interesting to do these things, to do the coding. And yeah, and then after a while, maybe a few months of this, Hadley asked me, like, hey, what are you doing after you graduate? What are you doing after you graduate? And I was like, I don't know. And so then he asked me if I wanted to work for him after I graduated. So yeah, so a few months later I did graduate. I finished up the book, and then I started working started working for Hadley at Rice University. And that was, so that was sort of how that all happened. It all, like the book and working in ggplot2 and all that, all sort of came together. yeah, so and that was super fun. It was very motivating to work on the book then. I really enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot. And it was you know, it was great. It was great to have that experience and to sort of it's also nice to have like it's like you've done to say like, oh, I've done this book. Because that actually can open a fair amount of doors. So I mean that just looking back at it, I feel like I was very lucky that these things happened, that like these opportunities sort of came to me. But, a friend of mine also pointed out, he's like, hey, Winston, you also sort of set up your luck by putting that information out there. So and he's right. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people that have done all sorts of interesting things, right? Um, but if you don't talk about it and you don't share these things, then people don't know about it, and so then there's going to be fewer opportunities that come to you. So I was lucky, that all happened. I wasn't planning on making opportunities out of this, but it's sort of it happened. And yeah, so I'm thankful, but I'm also glad that I did these things, even though I was not doing the things that I was not focused on the things I was supposed to be doing, which was like the academic stuff that I was in school for. So, yeah, so working on the book was very motivating and very, very, very fun. That said, like by the time I was working on the second edition, I was not, I had not been working on ggplot for a little while then, and and I had one kid, another one on the way for the second edition, so like I could barely make myself think about it. So there's definitely like a time for uh like sometimes if you can have that motivation and you can capture it and you can ride that, that can be really good. But sometimes, like that motivation just wasn't there for me for the second edition. And if somebody asked me to do a third edition now, I'd be like, I cannot, I absolutely can't do it. I'm not up on what the latest stuff is. And my mind is elsewhere these days. So yeah, I did have help working on the second edition. But yeah, but it was a slog. So but yeah, I know it's out of date, and it does need to be updated. So if anybody's particularly motivated, let me know. Okay, I've asked you a question here. So okay, yes, does the original R cookbook still exist online? Yes, it's just called Cookbook for R now. It's I think it's cookbook-r.org. And yeah, I actually made that change around the time that the O'Reilly book deal came together, because my editor, like we decided on the name Cookbook for R, or sorry, R Graphics Cookbook, and then he's like, well, you got this website, R Cookbook, and it's got the same name as this book, this book that we publish, and so do you mind changing it? And I was like, okay, sure. Cookbook for R doesn't have as quite of a nice ring to it, but it was, but it's still okay, I thought. I don't know if people still look at it or not. I don't look at the traffic at all for it anymore. It's just a static website. So, and I haven't been paying much attention to it. Oh, cookbook-r.com. Yes, thank you. I said .org, but yeah, my memory is, like I said, my mind has not been on it recently. All right, so that's the story of, how the R Graphics Cookbook came to be. And, I guess part of the story of like my life at the time also, and the kinds of things that I was interested in working on.
So maybe we can just open it up to questions, general questions about
Sure.
either ggproto or the cookbook.
Yeah. Pedro?
Yes, yes. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I started using ggplot very, very long ago, and remember that at some point, Hadley asked, I mean, in the mailing list, if to be able to ask to apply for funding to get someone to work on the programming of ggplot. And then, I mean, at that time it was very slow, and then, but I was wondering, it was you who was then the person employed after he got the grant.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't remember seeing that on the mailing list. That I don't know if that was before my time.
Yeah,
I know that I was the first person to be paid to work on ggplot.
okay, yeah, then probably it was 10. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So,
Yeah.
somehow I got paid through Rice University.
Yeah.
You know, like my title is like programmer associate 3 or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I remember how the huge change in the speed of. I remember
really?
at very early times. I mean, plotting many points, it was very slow, and then it was kind of a jump to something
Yeah.
working
Well, it's
much better. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so many people have been working on ggplot2 since then.
Yes.
That's really great to see, that really take off like that.
I have a question. Thanks for sort of sharing all of that history. It's really interesting. I had a question actually about like writing the book and sort of that process. I mean, not even as far as getting the publishing deal, but having quickly looked at the cookbook website, I noticed you have this sort of structure of like problem and solution. And I was actually just wondering at a practical level, like when you're writing this stuff up, like so one piece of advice I was given around like writing blog posts is like, as I'm working out a problem to like try and write the blog post, because once it's solved, I just don't care about it anymore. And I just, I was wondering what your process was.
Yeah. So I think, the kinds of things, so it came from, the cookbook for our website, like that sort of approach. And that was inspired by, I believe it was the Perl cookbook, like long time ago. I learned how to do stuff with Perl from that book. And, most of the problems are like certainly on the website, they're very bite-sized, right? It's like, like how to do a t-test, or like how do I, change the scales to be logarithmic or something on a plot. How to make a box plot. So, and those, I think when I was working on the website, I'll come to the book in a little bit. When I was working on the website, like these are all like actual problems that I had. Like how do I do this thing? And some of them were not maybe outside the bounds of like what I was actually trying to do in, for my research and for work. But it was all pretty close to things that I was actually trying to do. And the nice thing about that, at least the problems that I was writing about then, was that they were, they were like bite-sized things. They're bite-sized problems. And so, if you look at the website, which Joyce posted in the Zoom chat here, they're all pretty small things. And it's like I try to like give, here's the problem, and then here's like a little bit of code that'll solve the problem. And for the R Graphics Cookbook, the O'Reilly book, I tried to keep that mindset. There's actually a lot of things in there that I had never done before, that I hadn't used for for any work, like a lot like the mapping stuff, for example. I never used maps for any of my research or anything, but I tried to get in the mindset of like, okay, what would somebody try to do? Like, how do I, what are the what kind of question would come into their mind about when they're trying to make one of these plots. And because I really liked the cookbook format, like again, going back to the Perl cookbook, I really like that format. It's just like, here's a problem and here's the answer. And also with graphics, it's nice, having the print book here. Like this is also on the web, but having the print book, it's just like nice. You can just page through it and look at pictures and stuff, and then it's like if you can see what is the what is the thing that this is trying to do here? What's the problem it's trying to solve? Yeah, so that I feel like ggplot and also the problems that are the types of problems that or the issues that I would that I had that I write about in the book, those are like kind of bite-sized things like ggplot. Like most of the problems are pretty small, right? They might not be super, like if you're not familiar with how this stuff works, it might not be super super easy, but most of the problems are like relatively small. They don't take a lot of code. So it's fortunate that it lends itself to that cookbook format. There's other things that you might work on that don't that aren't like cookbook, aren't cookbookable, like like really complicated programming things, or like dealing with complicated data structures, or but this sort of for these plots and the visual format, it's like the cookbook style book I think worked well. I mean, so I'm curious, Cynthia, like what kind of things do you write about that you don't want to think about after you've done them?
So actually often it is these like bite-sized things. And I was thinking a lot of, so I got on the quarter train fairly early. And like I was sort of just solving like these little things, and even the fluency I think I have of navigating the quarter docs, I forget that other people like don't have. I'll just be like, oh, just look at the docs, and then I'll like look at the website again and be like, this is actually not super easy to sort of navigate.
Definitely.
So that was like one thing that sort of came to mind. But I also, sometimes I'm thinking about like sort of more complex things. I've got a particular interest in sort of like design patterns for like data science tools and like ggplot extensions particularly as well. And so those ones are like kind of more involved, but I was just more interested in, like where you got the inspiration to write up these bite-sized things. Because for me, I don't know, I'd chew on it for a bit, solve it, and then move on. And then like 3 months later, be like, I really wish I had written myself a note. Because then I'm like solving it again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you can motivate yourself to write it down, then the world can benefit from it. So that's it's a worthwhile endeavor. I totally get what you're saying. Like sometimes it can be hard. Some things don't lend themselves to that format. Like I've been working on Shiny for a long time, and like that's something where it's just inherently like you can't have like a reproducible example in like this much code. You need a lot. Maybe not a ton, but you need a fair amount of code, and so it's a little bit that's where we're like the cookbook thing doesn't work as well. I've wanted to do one, but it just doesn't work as well for that. So and I imagine for Quarto it's the same. Like you got you're gonna have a lot of stuff like to set up a whole Quarto document that's reproducible. Like there's a lot of other stuff you need to put there. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah, not everything works for that cookbook format, but if you can, I feel like it's a really nice digestible way for people to learn something.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your transition to Shiny, and if like you saw the lessons learned working on ggplot2 kind of impacted your work there. I think there's kind of modularity that's like really central to both frameworks.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. So I had started working at RStudio, and I was working on tidyverse related stuff for a while, like maybe I don't know, actually maybe like a year, maybe a little bit less before I started also working on some Shiny stuff. Yeah, and of course back then it wasn't called the tidyverse. It's just there's just like separate things. And there's dplyr didn't exist back then. Maybe it was less than a year. Anyway, so I started working on Shiny and Shiny related stuff. So Joe Chang, who is now the CTO of Posit, he was the person who originally created Shiny. He actually gave a super interesting keynote at our Studio Conf several years ago about it. About how it came to be. It was actually it was a very moving talk. It's very interesting. So if it's worth checking out, even though it's like an hour. Anyway, so he created Shiny, and so at the time, like our studio just needed more people working on Shiny, and it was because Shiny was starting to become a thing back then. It was like as a web framework for R, people were starting to use it more and more, and so that's how I started working on it. I got pulled into that, and as for lessons learned from ggplot, I don't know so much. I can't speak to the modularity. Actually, Joe is the one who came up with the module system for Shiny, but I think that the time that I'd spent working with Hadley was very useful for thinking about how to design interfaces that are very usable for people and easy to understand. And so, trying to make things composable, that's something that I hope I brought some of that sensibility into Shiny. And also thinking about how how functions should be how the function interfaces should be designed. That's something that Hadley is exceptionally good at, and I hope I learned something from that and brought some of that into Shiny. There are some places where that composability, I consciously tried to bring that in, like for there's some things that are similar to like decorative functions, like bind event. In Shiny, you can take a reactive expression or an observer and then pipe it to bind event, and then you can compose some of these things together. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Shiny is inherently, it's a much more complicated system than ggplot. Like ggplot is fairly modular, and especially with the grammar of graphics as like sort of like the guiding set of principles behind it, that really help make it more modular. But Shiny is it's this interactive web application, so there's a lot of moving interlocking parts. So, and I wish we could separate it out more to make it easier to understand and in smaller pieces. But that's a hard thing to do for something like Shiny.
You fall back on the cognitive psychology background in any of that?
That's okay. I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe I have a bit more background knowledge than the average person about some things, like perceptual things. I this wasn't in my research, but like before I was in, sorry, not my grad school research, but before I was in grad school, I worked in like visual cognition labs and visual perception stuff. So like maybe some of that sank in. But I think the most important thing about that was about having done graduate studies in that was just understanding what people do as scientists, and like as what do statisticians do, like what are the actual problems that people have when they're dealing with data. There's other people. There's other people who work at Posit who have a more pure software engineering background, and they don't, you know, so like, and they're smart people, and so, you know, they'll understand to some degree like the kinds of things that statisticians and data scientists do, but they don't like have a really deep feel for it, because they've learned that sort of from the outside looking in. Now with that said, I'm not, you know, I haven't been doing like that sciencey stuff for a long time, but I'm hoping that some some of the stuff that I learned still, you know, still informing the way that I think.
We have like 5 minutes for questions. Still, if there's any remaining. I guess I think that like Hadley sells a lot are based on the extensibility and the fact that like ggproto allows for that cross package inheritance working.
Yep.
Do you think that that is like overselling things a little bit? Can plot9 have a robust extension ecosystem?
That is a very good question, and I'm glad that Hassan is here, the author of plot9. Hassan, do you happen to be available to answer this? Oh, wait, did he just disappear?
Oh,
yeah.
I am on.
okay.
Yes, to some extent it does. To the extent that it doesn't, it's about being hard to do it given the underlying system, especially if I'll say this, like for the R environment, I know there's some qualms about grid being slow and whatnot, but it allows you guys to do so many things much more easily than working on top of matplotlib. So that is a boon for like the extensibility of like the types of graphics that you can do. In terms of design, yeah, you can extend plot9 to great to almost a similar degree as ggplot2, only that you soon run into the types of graphics that you can make and you can compose with the layout manager that is enabled by facilitated by, say, Grid, or in this in the Python side that is not really well facilitated by like the matplotlib architecture. So yeah.
Do you use prototypal inheritance in plot9?
No, just it's just no Python classes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Recently I turned most of what I like almost each class that I could to a data class to force some kind of like discipline, and yeah, that worked some.
Okay, great. That's nice.
Could I ask a really quick follow-up to that on the side of Python? So I remember like Winston made a big point about, you know, substitute being really important to preserve the laziness, so that the, you know, at compile time you don't get the lock-in situation. And like, as if I understand correctly, Python doesn't have that much flexibility in like its metaprogramming capabilities. Like, do you solve it another way, or is that just kind of not a concern about how Python packages are compiled and distributed?
In terms of implementing something like ggplot2 in Python, there isn't the only place where you have what you'd say where non-standard evaluation counts is in the mappings, aesthetic mappings. So yes, those capture the environment. They refer to variables in the data in the data frame environment and whatnot, and you evaluate them later. In the Python side, what they do is like just put the stuff into strings and evaluate them later. So yeah.
I suspect so June, so Hassan, I don't know if you were here for this whole thing. when I was talking about when you create a ggproto object and you specify what it inherits from, it captures that expression, but it doesn't evaluate it until, you know, until later. So in Python, if you have, you know, like you've got like your geomx class, right? Geomx, and that inherits, that's in your own package, and that inherits from the geom class in in plot9. Then because it's not so that because it's sort of this classical object oriented thing,
Yeah.
it's when you instantiate your geomx, that is when it will look at the superclass, and so that inherently is like, you know, that's delayed validation. I believe that's correct. I don't know, Hassan, tell me if I'm if I'm wrong here, but
Yeah, that's delayed inherit. Although that because that's the common way things work. There's most people like most of the time you don't think of it as like, hey, this is delayed inheritance. It's just like this is how it's supposed to work and this is how
right.
it works, you know. But
Yeah.
if you are comparing to like proto, then yeah, then it makes sense to add the word delayed because before you had you get those side effects and then you think about like, hey, when does the inheritance occur and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, we're at about an hour, so I don't want to take up any more of your time. It was a real treat to have you today, Winston, and to hear about this important moment in ggplot2 extension history. I think everybody's really appreciative to have been able to hear from you. And I
Yeah,
certainly
thanks for organizing this and giving me the opportunity to talk about this stuff. I haven't talked about many of these things in a long time, so it's kind of fun.